The following outline is provided as an overview of and topical guide to the human brain. Human brain, central organ of the nervous system located in the head of a human being, protected by the skull. It has the same general structure as the brains of other mammals, but with a more developed cerebral cortex than any other, leading to the evolutionary success of widespread dominance of the human species across the planet. While the emphasis below is on physical brain structure, functional aspects are also included. Mind concepts, as in mind versus body, and cognitive and behavioral aspects, are introduced where they have at least a fairly direct connection to physical aspects of the brain, neurons, spinal cord, nerve networks, neurotransmitters, etc. Structure of the human brain. This major section covers the physical structure of the brain. Visible anatomy. Basic structure. Human brain. List of regions in the human brain. Lobes of the brain. Brain. Basal ganglia. Brainstem including medulla oblongata, midbrain, pons. Cerebellum. Cerebral cortex. Hypothalamus. Limbic including amygdala. Neuroanatomy. Isolating the brain from other structures. Note: in conducting brain research, information where the other end connects is critical to understanding neural connections, and ultimately how the brain functions. The delineation of the brain from other parts, while retaining the "this is connected to" on the other end. Information is therefore a non-trivial brain mapping task. Central nervous system consists of the brain, and the attached spinal cord. The brain roughly floats on top of the ventricular system, a shock-absorbing area filled with cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, which also connects to and fills the entire spinal canal. The spinal canal terminates about 2/3 down the length of the spine, at the lower side of the first lumbar, L1. L1 is the first vertebrae not to have an associated rib, located roughly at the normal to high belt level. Peripheral nervous system consists of nerves outside the brain and spinal cord, where they are not protected by the human vertebral column, skull, and the protective blood-brain barrier. The peripheral part of the nervous system is therefore directly exposed to blood-borne toxins and much less guarded from mechanical injuries. Spinal cord. Many neurons originate or terminate in the brain and extend down into the spinal column. The spinal cord itself is a bundle of a vast number of neurons, with a total diameter of about 1/2 inch at the brain, thinning to about 1/4 inch diameter at vertebrae L1. Neurons vary in length from less than a millimeter to over a meter. The longest single human neuron currently identified extends from the tip of a toe, well over a meter, up to the spinal cord at L1. Neurons that both originate and terminate inside the brain itself can measure less than a millimeter. A single neuron typically has several inputs, dendrites, or sensors, a relatively long cord, axon, which typically branches many times, and has several outputs connecting to other neurons or muscle tissue. Neurons communicate information in a single direction from the input end to the output end. The spinal cord has 3 major functions. As a conduit for neurons communicating action information from brain outwards to motor muscles via motor neurons. As a conduit for neurons communicating sensory information, from the senses inwards to the brain, see also, sensory neuron, sensory receptor, proprioception, and category sensory receptors. As a center for coordinating certain automatic reflexes. Cranial nerves. Many neurons connect to the brain on one end, with the other end connected to another neuron, with the outside, the brain, junction located within the spinal column. Other neurons bundles which are labeled cranial nerves, connect to the brain on one end, and to locations outside the brain on the other, without having a junction inside the spinal column. Cranial nerves are actually huge collections of vast numbers of individual neurons that have found common roots through the body. They branch several times into smaller bundles which eventually reach many endpoints. With one exception, the optic nerve, they are all considered part of the peripheral nervous system. Cranial nerve 0, controversial but commonly found nerve which is perhaps vestigial or may be somehow related to the sensing of pheromones. Olfactory nerve, cranial nerve 1, smell. See also, olfactory receptor neurons. Optic nerve, cranial nerve 2, sight. See also, retinal ganglion cell. Oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3, eye movement, except rotation, including constriction of the pupil and maintaining an open eyelid. Trochlear nerve, cranial nerve 4, controls most eye rotation, with head still, look up, down, left, right. Trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve 5, provides sensation from the face and certain motor functions such as biting and chewing. Abducens nerve, cranial nerve 6, controls certain eye rotation. It controls the lateral rectus muscle used to bring the pupil away from the midline of the body. Facial nerve, cranial nerve 7, controls the muscles of facial expression, and taste sensations from the tongue and oral cavity. Vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve 8, transmits sound and equilibrium, balance, information from the inner ear. Glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve 9, primarily receives sensation from the throat, tonsils, part of the tongue, heart, and stomach. Also sends information to larynx and pharynx to facilitate swallowing. Vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10, sends output to the intestines, innervates the heart, receives taste information, deep/crude touch, pain, temperature of outer ear, larynx, name is akin to vagrant, i.e. wandering. Accessory nerve, cranial nerve 11, controls specific muscles of the shoulder and neck. Modern descriptions often consider the cranial component part of the traditional accessory nerve to be more properly classified as part of the vagus nerve, leaving what is left to be called the spinal accessory nerve. Hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve 12, leads to muscles of the tongue. Significant components. Arcuate fasciculus, the neural pathway connecting the posterior part of the temporoparietal junction with the frontal cortex in the brain and is now considered as part of the superior longitudinal fasciculus. Damage to this pathway can cause a form of aphasia known as conduction aphasia, where auditory comprehension and speech articulation are preserved, but people find it difficult to repeat heard speech. In 9 out of 10 people with tone deafness, the superior arcuate fasciculus in the right hemisphere could not be detected, suggesting a disconnection between the posterior superior temporal gyrus and the posterior inferior frontal gyrus. Broca's area region of the brain with functions linked to speech production. Caudate nucleus located within the basal ganglia is highly involved in learning and memory, particularly regarding feedback processing. Neural activity will be present within the caudate while an individual is receiving feedback. It responds to visual beauty, and has been suggested as one of the neural correlates of romantic love. It's associated with dysfunctional in persons having obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. Where it is speculated the caudate nucleus is unable to properly regulate the transmission of information regarding worrying events or ideas between the thalamus and the orbitofrontal cortex. Central nucleus of the amygdala serves as the major output nucleus of the amygdala and participates in receiving and processing pain information. Nucleus accumbens, part of the pleasure center, is a collection of neurons and forms the main part of the ventral striatum. It is thought to play an important role in reward, pleasure, laughter, addiction, aggression, fear, and the placebo effect. Pineal gland, a small endocrine gland in the vertebrate brain. It produces the serotonin derivative melatonin, a hormone that affects the modulation of wake/sleep patterns and seasonal functions. Ventricular system, a set of structures containing cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, in the brain which bathes and cushions the brain and spinal cord within the bone that confines them. CSF is denser than the brain and may impact imaging. It is also implicated in coup-contra-coup injuries such as the very common head-on collision where both the front and the rear surface of the brain are often damaged when both the CSF fluid and the brain itself are involved in a high-speed whiplash sloshing motion. Triangular part of inferior frontal gyrus part of Broca's area that contributes to propositional, true/false, language comprehension. Lesions of the pars triangularis lead to the loss of the ability to produce spoken or written language, expressive aphasia, vs. inability to comprehend language or speak with appropriately meaningful words, receptive aphasia. Microscopic level anatomy. Neuron, brain cell, and nervous tissue. Classifying brain cells/neurons by type: place cell, grid cells, border cells, head direction cells, spatial view cells, pyramidal cells, granule cells, also barrier cells, conjunctive cells. Synapse, chemical synapse, electrical synapse, neurotransmitter, synaptic vesicle, active zone. Cytochrome C oxidase. There is a direct relation between this enzyme's activity and neuronal activity. It is used to aid mapping of regional brain metabolism in animals. Virtual microscopy, a method of posting microscope images on, and transmitting them over, computer networks. Technology has advanced where digitized images are approaching that which is visible to the trained human eye under a powerful optical microscope. Electromagnetic theories of consciousness. A controversial theory asserting that consciousness is physically located in the brain's electromagnetic field surrounding rather than inside the neurons. Receptor cells. What can be experienced in the conscious and unconscious areas of the brain, from outside its confines, is largely informed by different types of receptor cells, their physical distribution throughout the body, and how they specifically encode information that is then conducted to the brain. Sensation itself, however, is a higher-level function, most frequently formed from a large fusion or integration of many different individual receptor inputs. Five senses. With a somewhat mystical, ethereal sixth sense fails to capture the very well understood range of how various receptor cells actually operate and what types of sensory information they actually encode. Receptor cells, which are highly unevenly distributed throughout the body, found in low through extremely high densities, include ampullae of Lorenzini. Respond to electric fields, salinity, and to temperature, but function primarily as electroreceptors. Baroreceptors respond to pressure in blood vessels. Chemoreceptors respond to chemical stimuli. Hydroreceptors respond to changes in humidity. Mechanoreceptors respond to mechanical stress and strain. Nociceptors respond to damage to body tissues leading to pain perception. Osmoreceptors respond to the osmolarity of fluids, such as in the hypothalamus. Photoreceptors respond to light. Proprioceptors provide the sense of position. Thermoreceptors respond to temperature, either heat, cold or both. Electromagnetic receptors respond to electromagnetic waves. History of the human brain. Brain evolution. History of neuroscience. History of neurochemistry. History of neuroimaging. History of neurology. History of psychiatry. History of psychology. History of neuropsychology. Brain development. This development section covers over time changes in brain structure. It includes normal development of the human brain from infant to adult, brain genetics, over many generations, and the evolution and adaptation of the brain over millions of years. Normal development. Neural development in humans. Neuroplasticity, changes in pathways and synapses due to behavior, environment, aging, injury, etc. Non-synaptic plasticity, modification of neuronal excitability in the axon, dendrites, and soma of an individual neuron, remote from the synapse. Parental brain. The brain of a new parent, especially the mother, exhibit remarkable patterns. Displaying parental sensitivity towards infant cues, processing those cues and being motivated to engage socially with the infant, and attend to the infant's needs in any context could be described as nurturing behavior and is regulated by many systems in the brain. Hormones such as oxytocin, prolactin, estradiol, and progesterone have been identified as important in the process. The medial preoptic area of the hypothalamus contains receptors for estradiol, progesterone, prolactin, oxytocin, vasopressin, and opioids. These hormones are involved in activating nurturing behavior. Other areas include amygdala, prefrontal cortex effect, amygdala and nucleus accumbens, stimulus salience, nucleus accumbens and medial prefrontal cortex, attention, nucleus accumbens and medial prefrontal cortex, memory. The capacity for attachment, bonding and empathy are closely related to nurturing and parental interaction during formative years. See in particular, postpartum depression, attachment theory, human bonding, interpersonal relationship, interpersonal attraction, interpersonal ties, empathy, mirror neuron, and antisocial personality disorder. Genetics. Cognitive genomics. Genes and genome-related aspects of health and activity of the brain. Intelligence is the most extensively studied behavioral trait. Includes genetic causes for many mental and neurodegenerative disorders including Down syndrome, major depressive disorder, autism, and Alzheimer's disease. Evolution. Neuroanthropology. Typical brain function. This section covers typical brain function as opposed to atypical function discussed below. Sensory input. Sight. Cognitive neuroscience of visual object recognition. The ability to perceive an object's visual physical properties, such as shape, color, and texture, and apply semantic attributes to the object, which includes the understanding of its use, previous experience with the object, and how it relates to others. Visual processing involves two neural pathways, the dorsal stream, how/where, which extends from the visual cortex to the parietal lobes, and ventral stream, what, which extends from the visual cortex to the inferotemporal cortex. 4 stages can be identified: 1 basics, including color, depth, and form; 2 grouping on the basis of similarity, providing information on distinct edges making up the visual form, and later, the figure ground segregation; 3 matching with structural descriptions in memory, and 4 semantic attributes that are applied, providing meaning, and thereby full recognition. See cranial nerve section, particularly optic nerve, number 2, sight, oculomotor nerve, number 3, eye movement, trochlear nerve, number 4, eye rotation, abducens nerve, number 6, additional eye rotation. Sound. Culture in music cognition. The impact that a person's culture has on their music cognition, including their preferences, emotion recognition, and musical memory. The neural processes of music memory retrieval share much with the neural processes of verbal memory retrieval, as indicated by functional magnetic resonance imaging studies comparing the brain areas activated during each task. Aphasia. Speechlessness, a disturbance of the comprehension and formulation of language caused by dysfunction in specific brain regions. See cranial nerve section. Vestibulocochlear nerve, number 8, sound and equilibrium, balance, information from the inner ear. Note that the sense of equilibrium, balance, does not involve sensing sound. Touch. See portions of sense, sensory system, sensory receptor, sensation, psychology. Spinal cord, peripheral nervous system and 12 cranial nerves, above, the main conduits for touch sensation processed in the brain. Touch and physical sensation are enabled by highly refined receptor cells. See the structure microscopic level anatomy section for more specifics. Reflex arc, a neural pathway that controls an action reflex. In higher animals, most sensory neurons do not pass directly into the brain, but synapse in the spinal cord. This characteristic allows reflex actions to occur relatively quickly by activating spinal motor neurons without the delay of routing signals through the brain, although the brain will receive sensory input while the reflex action occurs. Smell. Olfaction, the sense of smell. Olfactory sensory neurons project axons to the brain within the olfactory nerve, cranial nerve number 1. How olfactory information is coded in the brain to allow for proper perception is still being researched, and the process is not completely understood. However, what is known is that the chemical nature of the odorant is particularly important, as there may be a chemotopic map in the brain. This map would show specific activation patterns for specific odorants. When an odorant is detected by receptors, the receptors in a sense break the odorant down, and then the brain integrates the odorant information back together for identification and perception. See cranial nerve section. Olfactory nerve, number 1, smell. Taste. See cranial nerve section. Trigeminal nerve, number 5, facial sensation, biting and chewing. Facial nerve, number 7, facial expression, taste from the tongue and oral cavity. Glossopharyngeal nerve, number 9, sensation from the throat, tonsils, part of the tongue, heart and stomach. Swallowing and vagus nerve, number 10, sends output to the intestines, innervates the heart, receives taste information, deep/crude touch, pain, temperature of outer ear, larynx and hypoglossal nerve, number 12, leads to muscles of the tongue. Other sensation. Balance, ability, equilibrioception, the sense that allows an organism to sense body movement, direction and acceleration, and to attain and maintain postural equilibrium and balance. Also, vestibular nerve. Thermoception, sense of heat and the absence of heat, cold, by the skin and including internal skin passages, or, rather, the heat flux, the rate of heat flow, in these areas. Proprioception provides the information on the relative position of the parts of the body. Proprioception and touch are related in subtle ways, and their impairment results in surprising and deep deficits in perception and action. Nociception, pain, signals nerve damage or damage to tissue. The main function of pain is to attract attention to dangers and motivate avoidance. Other internal sense. Pulmonary stretch receptors found in the lungs and control the respiratory rate. Peripheral chemoreceptors in the brain monitor the carbon dioxide and oxygen levels in the brain to give a feeling of suffocation if carbon dioxide levels get too high. Chemoreceptor trigger zone is an area in the brain that receives inputs from blood-borne drugs or hormones, and communicates with the vomiting center. Chemoreceptors in the circulatory system also measure salt levels and prompt thirst if they get too high. Cutaneous receptors in the skin not only respond to touch, pressure, and temperature, but also respond to vasodilation in the skin such as blushing. Stretch receptors in the gastrointestinal tract sense gas distension that may result in colic pain. Stimulation of sensory receptors in the esophagus result in sensations felt in the throat when swallowing, vomiting, or during acid reflux. Sensory receptors in pharynx mucosa, similar to touch receptors in the skin, sense foreign objects such as food that may result in a gag reflex and corresponding gagging sensation. Stimulation of sensory receptors in the urinary bladder and rectum may result in sensations of fullness. Stimulation of stretch sensors that sense dilation of various blood vessels may result in pain, for example headache caused by vasodilation of brain arteries. Integration. Functional integration. Functional integration, neurobiology, the hypothesis that the integration within and among specialized areas of the brain is mediated by effective connectivity. For technical aspects, see function space, topological space, and functional integration. For some observations on this type of approach and localization of function, see neurophilosophy. Multisensory integration is the neurological process that organizes sensation from one's own body and the environment, thus making it possible to use the body effectively within the environment. Specifically, it deals with how the brain processes multiple sensory modality inputs into usable functional outputs. See also sensor fusion, data fusion, and information integration. Lateralization of brain function. Neurocomputational speech processing, computer simulation of speech production and speech perception by referring to the natural neuronal processes of speech production and speech perception, as they occur in the human nervous system. Neurocomputational models of speech processing are complex. They comprise at least a cognitive part, a motor part, and a sensory part. A neural network can be separated in three types of neural maps, also called layers, i.e. 1. Input maps, in the case of speech processing, primary auditory map within the auditory cortex, primary somatosensory map within the somatosensory cortex. 2. Output maps, primary motor map within the primary motor cortex, and 3. Higher level cortical maps, also called hidden layers. Affect. Affective neuroscience. Somatic marker hypothesis mechanism proposed by Antonio Damasio, professor of neuroscience at the University of Southern California and head of the Brain and Creativity Institute. Postulates that emotional processes can guide, or bias, behavior, particularly decision-making. When individuals make decisions, they must assess the incentive value of the choices available to them, using cognitive and emotional processes. When the individuals face complex and conflicting choices, they may be unable to decide using only cognitive processes, which may become overloaded. In these cases, and others, somatic markers can help decide. Somatic markers, probably stored in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, are elicited by the relevant stimuli and then summed to produce a net somatic state. This overall state directs, or biases, our decision of how to act. Emotions, as defined by Damasio, are changes in both body and brain states in response to different stimuli. Physiological changes, e.g., muscle tone, heart rate, endocrine release, posture, facial expression, etc., occur in the body and are relayed to the brain, where they are transformed into an emotion that tells the individual something about the stimulus that they have encountered. Over time, emotions, and their corresponding bodily change, become associated with particular situations and their past outcomes. According to the somatic marker hypothesis, when making decisions, the physiological signals, termed somatic markers, and their evoked emotion are consciously or unconsciously associated with their past outcomes and bias current decision-making towards certain behaviors while avoiding others. Mind/body. Philosophy of mind. Body integrity identity disorder, a psychological disorder wherein sufferers feel they would be happier living as an amputee. Supernumerary phantom limb refers to a condition where the affected individual believes and receives sensory information from limbs of the body that do not actually exist, and never have existed, in contradistinction to phantom limbs, which appear after an individual has had a limb removed from the body and still receives input from it. Memory. Methods used to study memory. Memory is a complex system that relies on interactions between many distinct parts of the brain. In order to fully understand memory, researchers must accumulate evidence from human, animal, and developmental research in order to make broad theories about how memory works. Part of this work is performed by neuropsychologists who attempt to map specific behavioral deficits to regions of the brain where damage is known to have occurred. One of the fundamental problems this specific type of research is the difficulty with experimental control. Comparisons usually have to be made between individuals, however exact lesion, or other damage, location, and topology, and individual differences cannot be controlled for. See also chunking, psychology, object permanence, memory and aging, exceptional memory, memory disorder and category memory processes. Eureka effect, also known as the aha effect, refers to the common human experience of suddenly understanding a previously incomprehensible problem or concept. It has been studied with EEG, ERP, and fMRI mapping. When participants experienced an aha moment upon viewing the answer to an unsolved riddle, activity in their right hippocampus increased significantly. This increased activity in the right hippocampus may be attributed to the formation of new associations between old nodes, which will in turn strengthen memory of both the problem and its solution. Muscle memory, the retention in the brain of memories of certain muscle movements, often enabling those specific movement to be duplicated in the future. Also termed motor learning, it is a form of procedural memory that involves consolidating a specific motor task into memory through repetition. When a movement is repeated over time, a long-term muscle memory is created for that task, eventually allowing it to be performed without conscious effort. This process decreases the need for attention and creates maximum efficiency within the motor and memory systems. Examples of muscle memory are found in many everyday activities that become automatic and improve with practice, such as riding a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, rote typing in a bank, personal identification number, PIN, playing a melody or phrase on a musical instrument, playing video games, or performing different algorithms for a Rubik's Cube. Memory bias and distortion. Choice supportive bias, the tendency to retroactively ascribe positive attributes to an option one has selected. Positive aspects tend to be remembered as part of the chosen option, whether or not they originally were part of that option, and negative aspects tend to be remembered as part of rejected options. Once an action has been taken, the ways in which we evaluate the effectiveness of what we did may be biased. It is believed this may influence our future decision-making. Fundamental attribution error, also known as correspondence bias or attribution effect, describes the tendency to overestimate the effect of disposition or personality and underestimate the effect of the situation in explaining social behavior. Actor-observer asymmetry, discrepancy between attributions for one's own behavior and for that of others. Reconstructive memory, a theory of elaborate memory recall proposed within the field of cognitive psychology, in which the act of remembering is influenced by various other cognitive processes including perception, imagination, semantic memory, and beliefs, amongst others. People view their memories as being a coherent and truthful account of episodic memory and believe that their perspective is free from error during recall. However, the reconstructive process of memory recall is subject to distortion by other intervening cognitive functions such as individual perceptions, social influences, and world knowledge, all of which can lead to errors during reconstruction. List of memory biases. Confabulation, false memories, a memory disturbance that is characterized by verbal statements or actions that inaccurately describe history, background, and present situations. Confabulation is considered honest lying, but is distinct from lying because there is typically no intent to deceive and the individual is unaware that their information is false. Research suggests that confabulation is associated with dysfunction of cognitive processes that control the retrieval from long-term memory. Frontal lobe damage often disrupts this process, preventing the retrieval of information and the evaluation of its output. Furthermore, researchers argue that confabulation is a disorder resulting from failed reality monitoring/source monitoring, i.e., deciding whether a memory is based on an actual event or whether it is imagined. Integration, computation and cognition. Sleep, dreaming, and imagination. Neuroscience of Sleep, the study of the neuroscientific and physiological basis of the nature of sleep and its functions. Areas of research include 1. What are the correlates of sleep, i.e., what are the minimal set of events that could confirm that the organism is sleeping? 2. How is sleep triggered and regulated by the brain and the nervous system? 3. What happens in the brain during sleep? 4. How can we understand sleep function based on physiological changes in the brain? 5. What causes various sleep disorders and how can they be treated? Sleep and memory. Memory is the cognitive process whereby experiences, learning and
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.